We're going to start today with Xiao. And she is a poet, a writer, a translator, and an editor. She was born in China and lives on Vancouver Island. Her book, which is named Then Telling Be the Antidote, won the Tupelo Press Berkshire Prize. Congratulations. And was published in May of this year. Another of her books, How Often I Have Chosen Love, won the Frontier Poetry Book Chapbook Prize and was published in 2019. And I'll be putting both her website and a link for where you can purchase her new book in the chat during the time she's reading. But at this point, I would like to welcome Xiao and thank you so much for being here. And we're anxious to hear what you have to bring us today.
Oh, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be able to read for you guys, and thank you so much for the invite. So actually, this is the book, Then Telling Be the Antidote, and I'll be reading from it. Actually, it was originally slated to be published in May, but we pushed it back a few months, so it's actually not out until November, but it'll just be in a week, so you can go ahead and find it wherever fine books are sold. So I'm going to be reading maybe 3 or 4 poems, time dependent, today. And I'll start by explaining a little bit about this collection and the kind of ideas and processes behind it. And it's called Then Telling Be the Antidote, which surmises the position that silence is a poison. And it took me a long time to be able to kind of collate and generate this collection, because for a long time, growing up in China and then like immigrating to Canada and growing up in that relatively tumultuous process was a practice in which silence was more often stifling than generative. And of course, after discovering poetry and beginning to work in literature, one often comes to find that silence is actually an incredibly precious substance, and it's necessary in order to cultivate and grow a lot of the ideas and a lot of the images that are necessary for the practice of poetry. But it took a long time for myself personally to arrive at that stance, because for a long time, silence, growing up in that kind of environment was extremely oppressive, extremely stifling, and more often than not, it felt like it was a slow and capable killer of the things that it was actually the things that productive silence can actually really grow. So that's why I wrote this book, Then Telling You the Antidote. It contains a lot of those kinds of stories that I felt that were being silenced around me during that time. And it is really an act of attention and an act of loving listening to reproduce the stories which are not necessarily mine, but which I felt were happening very vividly all around me at all times. So with that, I'll start with the first poem that I'm going to read, and it's called Inheritance. My mother says about Hong Kong, that wasn't your life, that was my life. She meant the chicken boiling with anise on the stove, and the rouge pinking the edge of the wooden spoon. The broth she raised to her mouth to taste. She meant I couldn't taste. Too young. She put cotton over my mouth when we went outside. Air softened. It was her life. All skins of oranges left outside to dry, and the anthemic thunder. This is not the life I want for my child. That was her life. I ran into Hong Kong on the street in the summertime. I say, I got off the plane and came right to see you. She wears orange, rouge, my mother's face. Upon her, so few places to lie. We sit in a cafe in Shangwan with pink cups, eating bean cakes. And later, I call my mother to say, I found our old apartment building, that I had walked up the blue stairs and laid my hand on the door. Hong Kong, a neon neckline, long hair glittering with ship lights, crystal balls, storm velvets. It's her life. Yet I had come and grown my hair and happened upon the eastern sun like a moon. In the morning, a warm wind moves me to the windows in quivers of bicycle bells and water hitting pavement. I look a long time at the woman awash in the windows. The transparency of her, the in-betweenness of her. I think I am in control of this liminal indecision, where nothing ends, where ruins are rebuilt with all that is thought to have been there. Thank you. The next poem that I wanted to read is also about Hong Kong, but it takes place during the protest against Chinese imposition on Hong Kong's democratic government procedures in most notably the autumn of 2019. And it was a time, I think, we were living, I think in the 21st century, we could almost define it as it is now from our position as an age in which public protest is notably redefined with the advent of technology and also with a new moral consciousness that seems to almost be fighting not so much for active change, but as just to be heard and so as just to be seen as a body on the streets or as a voice participating in the public consciousness. I read something a little while ago, I think maybe it was Judith Butler, who said that our new kind of heightened morality of our contemporary political situations can be, in a way, ascertained by our disbelief that anything can actually change, the fact that we can actually fight for progress and get it. So instead of kind of activating our more pragmatic instincts for change in policy or in government, we instead direct that change towards our own morality and our own moral compasses. This to me seemed to be a very interesting shift in direction. And as I watched the protests in Hong Kong going on during that time, I thought a lot about how it was occurring on the intimate bodily level of our own moral minds and our own kind of inherent ideas of what is wrong and what is right. Something that did not move without fragmenting into the public arena. So this poem is called Mongkok, October 2019. The unimaginable day was still watching at the scene of our surrender. Love was a small country with borders made reckless. Paiyang, I remember you like this because of the many things that could talk but didn't. The sky occasion, the bird-like occasion, the starting of desire with blindness blissfully after. and all the other things with no afters. Petrol, tear gas canisters, your face between my hands, small as if telescoped through centuries. I fell into that open mouth like color. The musical collapse of ordinary things. Nothing held its shape. Not glass, nor metal, nor nighttime, nor language and its conspiratorial loneliness. When in a burst of time a new world appears, I was still there in that warm middle, dissolving. It is so wonderful what one can do with the unfearing knowledge of nothing, when tomorrow is a ship full of capacity in Victoria Harbor, scalding. Payang, it lit your hands into a firing thing. You will cry because we were not able to change everything. But no, listen. The voices are rising and they are singing. They are circling in a strange new formation I've never seen before. An ocean-like current dragging the dead out, returning back to the shore, startlingly alive creatures, insatiable. Thank you. And the next poem I'm going to read goes back a little bit further than that to the economic reform after the Cultural Revolution in mainland China. During this time, the government put through a lot of procedures that were meant to equalize the wealth disparity between between the classes. And it was very interesting reading through these documents to see what they thought were proper in order to actually ascertain a type of equality that really has never occurred, that really they were kind of inventing out of nothing for the very first time. Because the fact of money kind of negates any sort of equality. The fact of possession negates equality itself. So it was very interesting to see how the Communist Party was writing the reforms in order to ascertain how things like money and property could be distributed. So this is called Wealth Distribution Will Not Be Considered in the Economic Reform. The get-rich-quick schemes in China always started with two men sitting on some battered patio over an oil slick of a tablecloth. The beer was cold most of the time, but warmed quick in the grasp of an anxious palm. You could tell how rich a man was by how often he talked about being poor. But back then, everyone was poor. Shanghai was a firearm of a city, grease-stark mechanics, and a heavy presence in the drawer of the day. Fruit skins draping the curb, estranged gauze of Huangpu River, pillowcases filled with plastic wrapping, the trigger twitches. This close to a bicycle for your wife. This close to a couple months of rent. This close to cottoning the quilts for winter and tangerines every summer night. Picking coins from pocket seams to buy hawberries and cigarettes, they sweated out July in brick dust. Scrawling out numbers with their fingernails, 200 yuan tomorrow, and the rest next week. Cash wanders in its own underground architecture. Caverns of paths and hollows that swallow men whole every few days. They leave with unbuttoned shirt sleeves and collars. They leave haunted in gold. Even early, the past midnight blue coveted the skins of their wrists and necks, soft as slow silk, begging to be let in. I've got 2 daughters, one of them says, and the other, asleep on the table, is silent. Thank you. So the poem, the 4th poem that I read, it's the last one, and it presents and it occurs in the latter half of the collection, and it occurs as something that is a little bit different from maybe the poems that were more so about listening, reiterating, and bringing into a new context the stories that are articulated in the poems that I read to you thus far. And this poem is more concerns more all of the phenomena that travels in between the totems of the past and the future, and how we, as maybe simply a threshold in the way of all that phenomena, can occasionally feel as though we're in control. And this poem is called Explain to Me Fate as If I Were a Child. How do things come up to be next to one another? Streets with no names press poorly upon mountains. Molasses twilight holding the day. Hip, push to hip during rush hour. And old photographs leaving yellow oil upon the new. The city bound flocking above the river water. The benevolent laying her hands on the unforgivable. The living light that eagerly tenderizes the dying one. How does a child meet the future just so? How do sprouts meet their flowers? How do various evenings meet in the kitchen over broths and breads? How many pairs of hands carried fruit to this bowl? What rhythm of music led some eyes from here to a place a little more dangerous? How did we come to be with one another? Here, as if enchanted, with no more reason than 2 grains of sand, and no less intoxication than 2 winds, infuriated by the distance they've both had to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Xiao. That's wonderful. And I will not forget these poems for a long time. And I'll be sure to get your book as quick as I can.